Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Re-Federalist Radio, where we take a look at current events through an original intent of the Constitution lens. I'm your host, Brady, also known in some strange corners of the internet as Warhamster, and joining me as usual is my good friend, constitutional mentor, Mr. Constitution himself, Douglas V. Gibbs.
Glad to be here. Strange corners of the internet, huh? Certain forums.
Never know. Before we get started, I just want to thank everyone listening on America Matters Radio, 93.7 KPGF, AM 1060, and all of you listening on the affiliate networks and stations, especially ZakiRadio.com. I would ask Doug how he's doing today. We just recorded another show about 2 hours ago, so I know he's doing well. But welcome. The point of, I guess, the whole theme of this show, looking at the original intent, and interesting to everyday events, it really got out in the news this week with a certain former vice presidential candidate, Tim Kaine. And let me just see if I can pull that up on screen here. And boy, we dodged a bullet on this one. And when I get up on screen, I'll hit play.
Yeah, we dodged a bullet.
Yeah, we did. Okay. What Tim Kaine had to say was rather shocking.
The notion that rights don't come from laws and don't come from the government, but come from the creator, that's what the Iranian government believes. It's a theocratic regime that bases its rule on Shia law and targets Sunnis, Baha'is, Jews, Christians, and other religious minorities. And they do it because they believe that they understand what natural rights are from their creator. So the statement that our rights do not come from our laws or our governments is extremely troubling. I think the motto over the Supreme Court is equal justice under law. The oath that you and I take, pledge to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, not arbitrarily defined natural rights.
And that is frightening. Ted Cruz gave an excellent rebuttal to it, but I think I'm going to let Doug give his own rebuttal.
Well, so John Locke didn't call them God-given rights. He called them natural rights. And the reason why is because our rights come from nature, and they are part of the natural order of things. What we know to be right and wrong, first of all. Second of all, and this is from a personal conversation with someone, Islam does not believe in natural rights. They do not believe that your rights come from God. They believe that your rights come from government, just like Tim Kaine does. And how I know this is one time I had a chance to sit down with someone who indicated to me that she was Palestinian. And because I had done some work for her bio and website years ago. And she, to give me my check for thanking me and my compensation. And she took me out to lunch and she says, I hear you're a Constitution expert. Tell me something about the Constitution I don't know. And my first thought was I could probably say anything and she won't know it. But nonetheless, I decided to say, well, your rights, that everybody talks about, your rights that are in the Bill of Rights, your rights come originally from God. And her immediate response was, no, they don't. They come from government. And then she went to explain to me how in Islam, your rights come from government. Yes, government claims to be in understanding of what Allah says, but they come from government. And it is up to government to dictate or take them away or add. Now, that said, here's the interesting thing about natural rights, if you don't mind. And he knew this would be something I'd be all over. So I'm sure Brady's not like, oh, man, really still? Because he knew this is something I'd have something to say about. God-given rights, what that means is your rights existed before government. They're God's gift. They are naturally yours. But the key part is they existed before government. Therefore, they are your possession, God's gift to you, and you had them, humanity in general had them before government even existed. Now, government can be involved in the sense of if our rights are violated, when rights go against other rights, to investigate, due process, all of that. I have a right to swing my arms. I don't have a right to swing my arms into Brady's nose because now I violated his right not to be punched in the face. Now government gets involved. But it's none of government's business to tell me whether or not I can swing my arms. And I'm supposed to be responsible with my right and know not to swing my arms in the general direction of his face. I'm supposed to be a responsible adult. But to sit there and then have government say, no, we've decided you don't have a right to swing your arms, and you're not going to swing your arms, except maybe in an arm swinging safe zone, I don't think so. None of government's business. It's up to me where, when, and why to swing my arms. Once again, I'm supposed to be responsible with it. None of government's business. They don't get involved. Government doesn't exist for my rights. They exist in case in an orderly society we interfere with each other's rights. Their job is not to touch our rights and investigate, due process, all that in case we interfere with each other's rights. I don't know. And here, what was interesting here is I don't know what our Texas Senator Ted Cruz had to say about this. This is just because I saw the video, and that's all I know so far about this story. I don't know the reactions.
Well, the full video goes on for about 6 minutes. Tim Kaine's whole speech. Okay. We'll play Ted Cruz when we get back from the break, because the first thing he says is it's too bad Senator Kaine is not here to hear my rebuttal, because apparently he left the chamber after delivering that.
Of course he did. Oh, that's hilarious.
The short version of it really is simple. If the government grants you your rights, the government can take them away.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the reason why God-given is important. Once again, they existed before government even existed.
Yeah, and it's a fundamental concept of the entire founding of this country. And to have a sitting U.S. senator and almost vice president not understand that, you really got to worry. You got to wonder about how the mind virus, makes this distortion that the government is worth worshiping. We'll get to the rebuttal on the other side of the break. I want to do this a little bit longer than expected because it's a great subject. So we will see you all on the other side. All right, we are back from the break. When we left you, Doug and I were talking about our God-given natural rights.
Yeah, and before we get into Ted Cruz a little bit more, I want to say something that I think is critical here. Tim Kaine's response is because the left is anti-Christian. He's basically claiming this is an attempt for Christian nationalism or a Christian theocracy. The idea of God-given rights, or should I say divinely dispensated rights, does not originally actually come from Christianity. It actually comes from the Saxons, who were pagans at the time they came up with this idea. They believed that your rights were divinely dispensated.
Yeah, natural rights.
Natural rights. They believed this because their system of government was doing everything it could to keep government from being tyrannical. This was a way to make sure that government could not interfere with your rights. And if you look at the Bill of Rights, this idea is carried through. When you read the Bill of Rights, and the first 4 amendments, for example, this is the language: Congress shall make no law, shall not be infringed, no soldier shall and shall not be violated in the 4th Amendment. This is not language telling the government they have any right to interfere with your rights. It's telling government, stay out of our rights, hands off, none of your business, stay away. You're not even supposed to get involved until there's a collision of rights where there needs to be investigation, arrest, whatever. And so I just wanted people to understand, I'm not just saying, well, this is a Christian idea. It actually is originally a Saxon idea, and the Saxons, while becoming Christians later, when they came up with this idea, they weren't Christians, they were pagans. This is not a Christian belief, although Christians agree because the Bible, in more or less, does agree with this idea. But I just wanted to get that out there. This is Tim Kaine trying to be against Christianity on an idea he doesn't even understand.
Well, let's see if Ted Cruz is a very, very smart guy, and he has he understands the Constitution quite well. He occasionally says some things I don't necessarily agree with, but let's see if he gets.
Usually, he gets over the target enough that
All right, let's get this back up on screen, and we will listen to Mr. Cruz real quickly. We've got the screen share going. There we go. And we'll just continue where we left off and listen to Ted Cruz's 2-minute rebuttal.
Mr. Barnes, I'd actually like to go back to the exchange you had with Senator Kaine, and I wish Senator Kaine was still here. Senator Kaine and I were elected together 13 years ago. He is a friend. I would actually encourage observers to go back and listen to what Senator Kaine said. because I have to say I think was disturbing and showed much of where today's Democrat Party has gone wrong. So Senator Kaine said in this hearing that he found it a radical and dangerous notion that you would say our rights came from God and not from government. I just walked into the hearing as he was saying that, and I almost fell out of my chair. Because that radical and dangerous notion, in his words, is literally the founding principle upon which the United States of America was created. And if you do not believe me, and you made reference to this, Mr. Barnes, then you can believe perhaps the most prominent Virginian to ever serve, Thomas Jefferson, who wrote in the Declaration of...
I'm going to go ahead and read the Declaration for us. All right. Opening paragraph. In Congress, July 4th, 1776, actually written the day before. The unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them.
Reference number 1 to natural law and your natural rights.
A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to this separation. He continues. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights.
Reference number 2 to your natural rights in the Declaration of Independence.
Kind of early on, huh?
Yeah, right out the bat. It's almost like it was really important.
And these guys were scared to death of government. They just, they were fighting. They were getting ready to take on the world's biggest empire because they wanted to get their rights protected. They were afraid of government. The last thing they were going to do is to form a new government that could take away their rights.
Now, if you don't mind reading just a little bit more, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Secure your rights. Keep them in place. Keep them yours. Keep them, in a sense, protected. But to secure your rights, keep them in your possession. That's what government's for. That's what I was saying earlier. They don't give your rights. They don't define your rights. They're not there to determine your rights. They're there to, in case there is an issue that your rights may be taken from you, to secure them in place, make sure they belong to you, to defend your rights, and if necessary, investigate, arrest, police, war, whatever, to preserve and secure those rights.
Yeah, he's saying right there that the sole purpose of instituting a government among men is to secure your natural rights, period. And that is the exact 180 degrees opposite of what Tim Kaine is suggesting. Now, I've always had a bit of an issue with that sentence because Jefferson took the original Thomas Locke quote and changed it to, Locke said life, liberty, and property. And property rights were a big deal with the founding generation. If you look at the Constitution, it is full of protections for property rights. But Jefferson decided to go with pursuit of happiness. I would have, I would have been okay with life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. But the reason why, if you don't mind me real quick, going into this, is there was a fear because they understood that your natural rights naturally come from God, but there were governments that were trying to dictate rights and say you have those rights because government lets you, or because you're entitled to be given it. That idea that we hear today was already around. And so when the word property was to be used, there was a fear that people would think, oh, well, then I'm entitled to property. Government's got to give me property. That was the fear. Well, property and owning property, possessing things is a part of your happiness, but you're not entitled to your happiness. You don't have a right to be happy. You don't have a right to have property. You have a right to pursue obtaining it. You have a right to pursue obtaining those other things. So while life and liberty, you have a right you already have, and it should not be tampered with in any way, shape, or form. Government's job is to stay out of the way of all those other rights so that you can pursue them, hence pursuit of happiness. So while
well, he didn't mean to disrespect the property. He meant to make sure that couldn't be used in the wrong manner because of the way it's worded.
Staying on the same topic of rights, I'm going to bring in another story that just happened, that's going on right now. We'll stay on the same topic. This is from a site called SCOTUS blog, Supreme Court Observer.
Oh, I love going to that website.
And every day they do, what's the morning read? And they give you the top stories about the Supreme Court. And this morning's had a great one. It says, Trump says he'll direct the Education Department to protect praying in public school. During his address at Monday's Religious Liberty Commission meeting, President Donald Trump warned that the religious liberty rights of public school students are under threat and promised to soon issue, quote, new guidelines on the right to prayer in public schools, according to Politico. In 1962, the Supreme Court held that state-sponsored prayer in public schools violates the First Amendment. I know Doug's going to have something to say on this one. But that ruling and others on the Establishment Clause do not prevent children from praying on their own or leading religious clubs on school grounds. In a statement to Politico, the Education Department's press secretary, Savannah Newhouse, said the department looks forward to supporting President Trump's vision to promote religious liberty in schools across our country. It's interesting. I thought we were getting rid of the Department of Education, but I'm glad they're doing this. Do you want to address the 1962 Supreme Court holding?
Well, the idea of that ruling comes from this concept that we know as separation of church and state. Separation of church and state does not exist in the Constitution. It is an unconstitutional idea. And in fact, it flies in the face of what the Constitution actually meant. If you read the First Amendment, the language is clear. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. They can't make a law saying that this religion is the state religion. State religion means you have to be a member of that church, you have to worship that, and if you want to be able to participate in any civic activities, voting, hold office, you must be a member of that religion, or that religion is going to receive tax dollars, which is what the established churches were doing at the time. Then it says, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Cannot make a law prohibiting the free exercise. Can't make a law establishing a church, but to make sure that this is not misunderstood, cannot make any law prohibiting the free exercise. So then the question is, okay, so is a child praying in school, Congress making a law for an established church? No.
Earlier today, we took a look at the Maryland Constitution, which was written in 1776. And in Article 23 of it, Maryland writes that as it is the duty of every man to worship God in such manner as he thinks most acceptable to him, all persons professing the Christian religion are equally entitled to protection in their religious liberty. Pretty darn clear which direction the founding generation was thinking on this subject.
Well, and this is the point I was getting ready to get to. What this is saying, that Congress should make no law, is this a state issue. If a state, don't freak out just yet, everybody. If a state says we want prayer in school every day and we want to establish religion or whatever, they can. I'm not saying they should. They can. There were only 4 states that didn't have established religions at the time of the ratification of the Constitution. That means that there was 9 other states that did have established religions. Did they suddenly get rid of their established religions because of the First Amendment? No, it's a state issue. Then we get into the Danbury Baptist with
Thomas
President Jefferson right after he takes office in 1801. They're like, hey, congratulations. Thanks for taking it up. Can you help us? Because the Puritans, established religion. We're Baptists here in Connecticut. We can't do anything. He says, hey, there needs to be a wall of separation between church and state, which is where this idea comes from. But what he said was, if you continue reading his letter, is federal government can't involve. It's a state issue. It's between you and your state. In 1818, the state of Connecticut finally did establish religious freedom in that state with their Constitution, which replaced the fundamental orders of Connecticut. But it's a state issue, is what was being said. federal government has no business getting involved in religion. It's none of their business to be making laws regarding religion, not dictating to you where your rights come from or whether or not children can pray in a school, or that there would even be at the beginning of the school day, all right, everybody, we're going to have a couple minutes of silence so everybody can pray or whatever.
Right. Well, that'll take us to the break, and we'll continue when we get back. Okay, we've been talking about rights and freedoms, First Amendment, freedom of religion. I'm going to shift gears on us for this part to get back to one of my favorite topics, one of mine and Doug's favorite topics. I mentioned earlier that we had a show earlier today. It's what we call the Re-Federalist Report. And right now, Doug and I are going through the Philadelphia Convention, James Madison's notes from the Constitutional Convention. And the reason we're doing that is because if you want to know what the original intent is, this is probably the best place to look. These are the guys who created that intent. And that's, we've talked about that quite a bit. One of my favorite issues has been what they debated right at the beginning, was about apportionment of the legislature. And what I mean by that is, under the Articles of Confederation, there were 13 states, and each had one vote in the Congress. And because of that, the big states thought that they were being bullied by the small states, and we wanted to protect the big ones from the small. But if you do it by pure population-based, the big states can bully the small states. And the whole key is to protect the big from the small and the small from the big. I'm going to pull up my favorite little graphic on this topic to show you
what you're talking about is a word I like to use a lot when I talk about the Constitution: balance.
Yes, exactly. And that's where they came up with a compromise of the U.S. Senate is basically one per state, well, two per state is what they came up with, but it's equal representation of the states. And the House of Representatives is purely population-based. So California, being the most populous, should have more representatives. And you get the balance between the two. When you look at this on a state level, most of the states did almost the exact same thing. Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution guarantees every state a Republican form of government. And this is what they meant, not a pure democracy, not population-based. Can we get that picture up on the screen, please? And so the states did the same thing, and it worked out pretty well. 49 of the 50 did. I think Nebraska's got a unicameral legislature. What this changed, this idea, this concept of one person, one vote comes out of the progressive courts of the 20th century. And, it says I'm not sharing. Here, I'll get it right now. Here it is.
If at first you don't succeed, click again.
Not sure why. Yeah, there it goes. Having a little bit of technical difficulties. All right, even without that, basically just showing the chart of the population. There it is. You can see here, at the time of 1790, the 6 biggest states would have controlled 84 votes if they were represented by population, and the 7 smaller states would have only been 30. So the small states are never going to sign on to the Constitution if that's the case. They go, forget this. You're going to bully us around. What's the point of us even having a state? And that's why they came up with a great compromise of how we do this. When the states the Supreme Court started getting involved in 1964, they had a ruling on something called Reynolds v. Sims. And basically, it created one person, one vote. In other words, if you look at a state like, most states have one big blue city.
Typically.
And that would be their House state legislature. Their state Senate would be representative of probably one senator per county. And that gives the rural counties protection from the big cities. You got a state legislature that's population-based and a state Senate that is based on county representation. Reynolds v. Sims reversed that and forced every single state to have their draw up state Senate districts that are population-based. And it got so bad. California is the best example. You have 58 counties, which means 58 senators.
At the time, you had 40.
Really, they grew 18. That they split off that many. I was not aware of that back in 64.
But anyway, go ahead. Let's go with your 58. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, what that means is, currently, Los Angeles County has somewhere between 15 and 18 senators in the state Senate. You also have a state Senate district up north that has 6 different counties all sharing one senator. We don't have equal representation of the counties. And that's a real key fundamental part of what a republic is, what federalism is. If we were to reverse Reynolds v. Sims you'd end up with 51 red counties in California and 7 blue ones, more than likely, give or take. What that does is in the state legislature, you've got a very, very red state Senate and a very, very blue state assembly. What are they going to have to do, Doug? Compromise.
Right.
Now, if we talk about overturning or repealing the 17th Amendment and getting U.S. senators back to being appointed by the state legislatures, what happens when you get a something like California with a red and a blue split like that? Well, they're going to send one Republican and one Democrat to Washington, D.C. You do this across the country. How many U.S. senators would be Republicans right now, Doug?
Well, according to my calculations, 70, I think it was 76 was the number I came up with.
Yeah, I've seen estimates range from right in that range, 74, 75, right there. So, and that's kind of a big deal. You want to talk about now impeachment's back on the table? You got judges that are acting out, what they're not supposed to be doing. We can now use impeachment again. And that's going to change the behavior of just about everything in D.C. It's a big deal. But that actually requires overturning the 17th Amendment. Now, we could probably get that if you get all these red senates become Republican around all these states that have been disenfranchised. You got a much greater chance of getting an Article 5 convention. You only need a few more states to vote for that, and we can actually have a conversation like repealing the 17th Amendment. Doug and I have done a couple of videos, one on repealing the 17th Amendment, one on Reynolds v. Sims. I will put this in the show notes on my channel at Rumble, which is War Space Hamster, and you're going to want to review that. But this is a really big deal. If you get the Reynolds v. Sims overturned, and we'll talk about how we can do that, the House of Representatives in California changes dramatically because
any state, and real quick for those of you who are in Nevada, California, anywhere, if it was one senator per county, would your legislature look differently? Absolutely. That state Senate would be very different.
And you also have two different sides working on the gerrymandering issue, how to draw up the districts, and they're going to have to compromise. You're not going to have, California state with 40% Republicans get almost no representation whatsoever. Massachusetts, 0 Republican members of the House of Representatives.
Despite the fact that 40% voted for Trump.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
No, because the Democrats have been a lot better at gerrymandering for quite some time. Republicans are just really late to the game and they're catching up, but
and they're not really gerrymandering in Texas as much as they are undoing the gerrymandering of the Texans of the Texas Democratic Party. But
anyway. Very much so. Yeah, so most of the Democrat states threats to we're going to gerrymander you out of right back at you. Well, they really can't because they've already done it. There's only so far they can push the limits.
Yeah, and real quick about California. So California had. Began with 27 counties, and then they got right around 40, right around the time of the war between the states. But then something happened after the war between the states. What was going on after the war between the states? Lots of new building, new structure, people moving westward, railroads, right? So then from basically the end of the war between the states and the turn of the 20th century, California slowly increased because population's increasing. It slowly increased from about 40 to 58. It's been 58 since 1907.
So the question is, why are we talking about this today? And how can we get Reynolds v. Sims overturned? Well, as you all know, I now live in New Hampshire. And Doug and I have talked, Doug's talked to some people in Utah about being the state that does this. And it should be Utah because when the 17th Amendment was ratified, several states didn't ratify it, but Utah never did.
And they were actually very vocal about it. Hell no, is basically what they were saying, to put it nicely.
Not just no, but hell no. Unfortunately, we have not made any traction with Utah. I think the GOP there.
I've got two legislators in their house that have talked to me, and they've given me promises, but I've never gotten anything out of it.
So before I moved to New Hampshire, I had heard about the Free State Project, which is basically it's libertarian-minded, but they are really active to create this Free State Project in New Hampshire. And you can get stuff done in a small state. Since I've been here, I've gotten to meet some of the local groups involved in this Free State Project, and I am downright impressed with some of the stuff they've gotten through. New Hampshire, state surrounded by blue states, has got a Republican majority in both the supermajority in the Senate and a majority in the House delegates, which is phenomenal. And they get a lot of good stuff done, despite occasionally having a rhino governor. So I've been talking to these people about Reynolds v. Sims, and I think this could be the state where Reynolds v. Sims could be passed in the State House. And perhaps, if that happens, it gets challenged in court. And I believe that the court of first jurisdiction for that would be the Supreme Court. This current Supreme Court is very likely to take a serious look at overturning Reynolds v. Sims. And right there, in one fell swoop, you just changed the entire electoral makeup of the country. It's probably worth 50 seats in the House of Representatives overnight. And again, it gets just a chance to do a lot of better things. You want to fix California, you got to fix the voter rights, get rid of motor voter, get rid of ballot harvesting, all that stuff. Well, that'll happen if you've got a Republican state Senate. You just changed the whole country in one fell swoop. And that's what I'm talking about to these guys about in New Hampshire. And there's some pretty smart guys. They're listening. And they'd asked me to give a 10-minute concise version of this story. And I think I just did it in this 12-minute segment. So I'm going to have to put this into writing for them. And maybe we'll have a conversation. If they can get this thing done in the legislature, I'm going to work on that. And I think it's the right place and the right time. So when we get back, as I was doing this homework.
Well, I was actually taking notes because of what we're talking about, things that I want to write about, and things I want to say later on. You got about a minute and a half before we go to break. So real quick, Reynolds v. Sims. I'll give you an example why Reynolds v. Sims, getting rid of it and how democracy has ruined us. Okay? So in Los Angeles, there are 15 senatorial districts based on population. Before Reynolds v. Sims, LA County would get one senator. They're getting 15 senators. Meanwhile, in Northern California, one of the districts, there's one district that has 8 counties, and if I remember, there's one that has 12. So you've got roughly 20 counties being represented by 2 senators there. And by doing it one per county, now what happens is that rural area gets a louder voice. And that was really the aim. That was really why it was done that way. Early on, it was kind of a mixture among the states, but eventually all the states settled into one senator per county. And why did they get rid of it in 1964, Reynolds v. Sims? Because it's not very democratic.
That's exactly what they said in the Supreme Court decision. We need to be more democratic. And that flies in the face of Section 4 of the Constitution guaranteeing a Republican form of government.
Violated the Constitution with that ruling. All right, let's go to break.
All right, we are here for our final segment of Re-Federalist Radio. We were talking about Reynolds v. Sims and how to reapportion state senators to make it one per county. As I said, I'm here in New Hampshire, and I've spoken to a couple of people about this idea, and they're interested. So I figured I'd better do some homework on how New Hampshire does their state senator stuff, state senate apportionment now. And I had a little bit of fun with this. If I could get my screen share up there, Mr. Producer. And what I did is I went to Grok, a little shortcut, better than a search engine. So how many counties are in New Hampshire? Apparently there's 10. So you'd think they would have 10 state senators. That's not the case. When did New Hampshire last have 10 state senators? I thought that, because that's not the case. He goes, Grok comes back with New Hampshire State Senate has had 24 members since a constitutional amendment in 1877, which doubled the number from 12. So how do you get 12 state senators from 10 counties? And established the current structure of 24 districts. Prior to that, from the state's founding in 1784, the Senate consisted of 12 state senators. So I go, how did New Hampshire originally apportion its state Senate districts? Now this gets fascinating. The original apportionment, it says it's evolved significantly since the state's founding, shaped by its early constitutions and efforts to balance representation with population and geography. Sounds all good so far. The original apportionment, the state Senate was structured to ensure representation based on taxable wealth and geographic divisions, reflecting the state's small agrarian population and the political philosophy of the time. Now, we haven't seen this before, based on the taxable wealth.
Well, this idea, though, did get mentioned during the Constitutional Convention a few times.
It did. In fact, we just saw it, they touched on it on today's show a little bit. So this is why it's fascinating.
And notice it says reflecting agrarian population, a political philosophy of the time. The ideas of why they did things they did was to make sure the agrarian areas had a voice. Go ahead.
The 1784 Constitution established the Senate with 12 members, elected annually. This number was fixed and not explicitly tied to population, but to a system of proportional representation based on taxes paid by communities. Pay to play. Wealthier get more representation. Okay. It goes into some of the formation of it. Each district was allocated a number of senators based on its tax contributions. For example, Rockingham County, which is where I live, had more senators, typically 5 or 6, while less populous like Grafton might have 1 or 2. So they had a really interesting compromise going on there. Well, let's see, why did it change? We get to 1877. The pressure grew to align representation more closely with population rather than taxes, especially as New Hampshire, New Hampshire, I keep wanting to say, industrialized. The 1877 constitutional amendment increased the Senate to 24 members and shifted apportionment to a more population-based system, though still within county or district boundaries. This change aimed to balance representation as urban areas grew, but it retained multi-member districts until single-member districts were mandated in the 20th century. So that's pretty fascinating history.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that, and this is the question asked to me, would it make sense for New Hampshire with, I believe it's 16 out of 24 state senators being Republicans, would you, if you went to 1 per county, you're losing 4 seats. Would you be able to keep your supermajority? So we'd have to do some work on that. It's an important question. But it's something I think you and I are probably both going to end up spending some time on if we've got the ear of people in the legislature that are willing to talk.
And like I said earlier, not all of the states, especially early on, necessarily went with the 1 per county idea, but large number of them, if not the majority of them, did it. And the newer states put in their state constitutions westward that they would. Utah being one of them. It was in their state constitution, 1 per county.
Yeah.
And Alabama was doing it that way. And this is where Reynolds v. Sims comes from. Alabama was sued for doing it that way because, it's not very
democratic. Yes. Remind me, do we live in a democracy?
Exactly.
Of course, Earl Warren, Supreme Court of 1964, sure thought so.
Yeah.
And that was just one of many cases, but that was the final one that got us there.
Well, New Hampshire, that's interesting because I did not know the history there. And the question is, did they never went to 1 per county while most states did, and because but they didn't necessarily go by population either. That is interesting. And once again, the ideas of protecting the agrarian voice was important to the early generations. But this idea of based on pay to play, basically, as you put it, that's a fascinating twist in the story because, like I said, you see that brought up a few times during the Constitutional Convention. And I always wondered where that came from. There's a great example.
Is there any doubt in your mind if they were to pass that, we're going to be hit with lawsuits very quickly?
Well, that's kind of the idea.
Yeah.
If a state is to go back to or institute a 1 per county, because everybody's like, well, 1 person, 1 vote. Well, that's democracy. What does it say in Article 4, Section 4 again? Guaranteed Republican form of government. This is not to say that the vote of the people is not important, but it must not be the entire system. You've got the House at the state level. You've got the House at the federal level for the people, which is city dominated. But what would happen is if any state, Utah, New Hampshire, Nevada, guys here in Reno, if you guys were to decide to suddenly change it to 1 per county, which in almost all the states would be very beneficial to the agrarian areas, make sure they have more voice in the Senate, I guarantee you there'd be a lawsuit. But here's the thing. If that lawsuit's against the state, Article 3 says, well, then the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction.
That's exactly right. And going back to protecting the rural areas, something Doug said, and I've borrowed from him from time to time, is you don't want people in the city telling people in the rural areas how to farm.
Exactly.
You don't want people in the rural areas telling people in the city, well, actually, you probably do at this point in time.
I just send in the National Guard.
Oh, that's a good segue into one last constitutional question we can address real quick,
Okay.
because it looks like Trump is sending in the National Guard to Chicago.
Okay.
And again, we've talked about this before. You can do it in a state like Louisiana because you've got a Republican governor, and he can request it to clean up New Orleans.
Or the legislature could request it if they are in session.
Mm-hmm. But Illinois, you most certainly have a very Democrat legislature and governor, and very loud.
So the state is not only not going to ask for help in Chicago, they're saying, "Show up, and we're ticked. Get out of here. We'll throw you out."
Yeah, I saw an interview earlier today. I think it was on Charlie Kirk's show. Some kid, probably early 20s. He was down in Chicago interviewing a bunch of gangbangers. One guy had like 3 bullet holes in his stomach. And
I saw that.
Did you? Yeah, it was. Kids got guts to go down there and interview these guys, but some of these people that he interviewed, they don't want change. They like the gangbanger lifestyle. But I think most of the people are happy, to be able to walk the streets safely.
So I guess the question is, can constitutionally the president send the National Guard into Chicago, even though the legislature and the governor are saying, heck no?
That is the question. What say you?
All right, so constitutionally, Article 4, Section 4, once again, after the Republican government thing, it says that upon the application of the legislature or the governor, when the legislature cannot be convened, the federal government can go into a state for domestic violence. Article 1, Section 8 talks about the military and the militia. And I want us to understand something here. The left is telling you, well, the president wants to send the military into these cities. That is not true, first of all. So first of all, let's establish a distinction here. National Guard is not the military. It is the militia. It is an organized militia. Yeah, they're pretty darn close to being the military, and it almost seemed like, but these are weekend warriors. These are your average guys who, do the weekends and the 2 weeks a year and all that jazz. National Guard.
Yeah, and the ones in D.C. spend a lot of time picking up trash.
Yeah, well, because all the crime suddenly vanished. So first of all, this is not military. This is militia. And in Article 1, Section 8, it says that Congress can provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. Don't need the state's permission for that. You also don't need permission from the state to guarantee the state a Republican form of government. But if it's for the purpose of domestic violence, they do. So can Trump send the National Guard into Chicago? If it's for the purpose of executing federal law, like immigration law, if it is for the purpose of suppressing insurrection, repelling invasion, immigration law, a lot of these criminal, whatever, then yes, they can. They don't need the permission. The other thing is this: it is expected for law enforcement to work with them. So, well, we don't want to do the federal government's job. All right. So does the local law enforcement, when a bank is robbed, wait for the FBI to show up before they do anything? No, because it is upon the local law enforcement to also help carry out the law, even if it's a federal law. Yes, you're right. It's a federal issue, federal law enforcement, but it's a concurrent issue. Oh man, FBI's not here. We got to let the bad guy run away. Man, that really sucks. No, that's not how it operates.
Yeah, we've got some precedent going, but we've gone through the history on this show before of the precedent. But we got about 2 minutes to go. Why don't you real quickly tell everyone where they can find you, Doug?
Well, the fun is DouglasVGibbs.com. I've got a great blog there. The difficulty is, for about the last week or so, there's been some issues I haven't been able to post. That's okay. If you've never been to my site before, there's still plenty to read. Once everything's back into the way it should be, and we get everything fixed, I will start posting again every day, and probably even start putting a glut of stuff, because I got to make up for lost time here. So DouglasVGibbs.com, and don't forget also, I'm on some type of show, either AM radio or online somewhere, every day of the week except for Monday. Want to learn more? DouglasVGibbs.com. Every time I have a new show, once I'm able to post, I always put in the radio section of my website where that show is, when it is. Hope to see you there.
I wish I had the time to do that many shows. I'm trying to get about 3 per weekend. I've got a big one coming up on Friday with Colonel Towner Watkins on her channel, The Colonel's Corner. And we've been going through the secret societies, and we're going through Scroll and Key from Yale University. And we're going to look into a couple of real blue blood families on Friday, the Delanos and the Roosevelts. And there's some pretty interesting stories with that. So I think that's going to be a lot of fun. And Doug and I are still going to keep on plodding through the Madison's notes from the Constitutional Convention. And I was just going to say, one of the reasons they actually convened in the first place was because of posse comitatus, that concept. And that's, we know that they thought about these things in advance.
Yeah, the same questions were being asked back then.
Yep. More things change, the more they stay the same. All right, until next time, everyone, thanks for watching. Cheers.